am Kelly Wallick, the CEO and founder of the Indie Mega Booth, the chairperson for the Independent Games Festival, and community builder for the One Up Fund. And this is the Hades Fireside chat with Amir, the studio director of Supergiant Games. So I want to welcome Amir to our virtual stage.
Hello, I'm Amir Rao. I'm the studio director of Supergiant Games. I've worked on all our games, Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and Hades, which is the game we'll be talking about today. At Supergiant, I coordinate our work and I do game design. So I'm one of the designers who is responsible for tuning various parts of the game and making sure the game is coming together. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about our experience making Hades. I'm excited to be back at GDC in some form.
I know.
Yeah, I've always loved this conference. I was a conference associate in like 2004 or something like that as a volunteer for GDC. So it's really, really cool to be back here and to be speaking at it. I think the last time I spoke at GDC was at the Failure Workshop. So this is like pretty good gap between that. We were talking about Bastion actually. I believe that was the last time I spoke at least. So yeah. That was a long time ago.
It was. My impression was Bastion was not a failure. So
no, yeah, it was
actually, Workshop was about.
Yeah, well, the Failure Workshop is really interesting. It was actually talking about mechanics that didn't work, and one of the mechanics that didn't work in Bastion was we had this whole gardening game inside of Bastion that really didn't work, and so it was discussion of the things that didn't really pan out inside that game, even though the game came together pretty well. Actually, yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of Bastion coming out, so that was that was exciting too. So it's a lot of exciting stuff happening.
Yeah. One of my favorite kind of Supergiant connection stories for me is I actually still have the Bastion bandana that you guys were giving out. And I don't even know what conference that was. I feel like that was the first time I met you all.
PAX in 2011, I think, before the game came out. Yeah,
9 million years ago.
yeah, it was. It was the show floor was a little different than it was at PAX East.
Yeah,
it was exciting to see those everywhere.
Yeah, a lot has happened since then, and yeah. So I mean, I've known you and most folks on the team since those days. And I think we were talking a little bit about this. So part of my homework for this is I watched the entire No Clip documentary, which is amazing, by the way. If you have an extra 5-ish hours and you really want to hear a lot of things about Supergiant and game development, I'm like total thumbs up on it. Highly recommend it. But it was like a very interesting insight after knowing all of you for so long and through so many different like games and iterations of not so much the studio, because a lot of the core components of the studio stayed the same, but just like to kind of be along on that journey and then like kind of see this like climax of how well Hades has done and been received was like very, very cool. So as a friend situation, I'm like super happy for all of you and it's really exciting to see that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're just over the moon with the success and the reception of Hades. And it's one of those things where we did not know to expect that, but it's been wonderful to see so many people love the game so much.
Yeah, the reactions in the documentary to you all, especially watching the Game Awards thing, and now I can see why you like Jeff Keighley so much. Like just in general, like it's just like a cool situation. There's like this thread, throughout.
He's a very hard worker. He I mean the way he puts together a lot of that stuff, it just takes so much. So yeah, I've always been a fan of the way he conducts himself and the way he puts those events together.
Yeah, but like watching really the reaction of the team, as they're like announcing, and everyone's on Zoom, of course, because it's pandemic time, and also too like the games you're up like nominated against was like legit. Game. I mean, not that Hades isn't a legit game, but like that was like some impressive. That was an impressive lineup to be up against as well too.
Yeah, we're actually lucky. We're nominated for 6 awards in tonight's show for the Game Developers Choice Awards. So that'll be really exciting as well. I think we won a Game Developers Choice Award for Best Debut in 2012 for Bastion.
Wow.
So. The whole group of people who worked on that game is still working together at Supergiant Games today. And so, we just feel really lucky to have been able to keep doing the work through everything, through several games, through the the last year and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's incredible. And, you know, one of the things that I had realized with the documentary is like, I didn't realize how early Jen was on the team, because I feel like she's like a little bit enigmatic in the sense of like, you know, I don't really like hang out and like see her at conferences and stuff, but like she was in pretty early, right?
Yeah. Jen is one who prefers to speak with her work, and her work is incredible.
Her work speaks very loudly. So I think that's fine.
Yeah. So Jen Z is the art director for Supergiant Games. She came up with all the character designs and obviously a lot of the art direction, art style, a lot of the execution of specific assets in the game. She just has her hands in everything related to the art that we do. Yeah, Jen is incredible. There's like, I think the shocking thing about a talent like Jen, and this is true of almost, I say almost because I don't want to include myself in such a statement, but of everyone I work with, is, you know, I sort of, when you have a game like Bastion come out and you have a lot of people love it, and it's your first game, I think, you know, a lot of us would have been right in expecting that was kind of as good as it was going to get for us, because, you know, we came out of nowhere, people really liked it. It was our first effort and all that kind of stuff. But like the crazy thing about Jen and Greg and Darren, all these people I work with, is like somehow they get better and better and better. I think that's the like sort of joy of working with them as individuals, but also the joy of our chemistry as a group is, you know, we have these long relationships that have gone over several games. And then for Hades specifically, we like added all these new voices. So we were 12 people for a really long time, for about 5 years before making Hades. And over the course of Hades, we grew to around 20 people, a little under 20. And so, you know, we've added all these new voices who are integral to the stuff we've been making, and we're just so important to making Hades the game it was.
Yeah, and that kind of answers a little bit of like one of my, I guess, first official questions, which I was like live journaling my thoughts while I was watching this documentary, is like, why is Jen so amazing? Like that scene where the concept art for Chaos comes up, I was like, oh my God, so good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is she so great? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's just one of those things, you know, even when you work with her, she's like really, really amazing to talk to and collaborate with. And she's very articulate about what she's trying to do. But then there's this whole invisible process where the art is made, or even sometimes it's happening, you know, a couple seats over, and you still, you know, it's always shocking and surprising to see what will be done with it. Yeah. That's another part about working on the team that I feel really, really good about, is there's a lot of like elevation of each other's work. So, you know that the various parts of the pieces that other people are working on are gonna kind of like raise what you do. So even if what you do is still kind of feeling like a work in progress, and that happens a lot on the design side, you know, like, hey, when this gets good feedback, when this gets like a theme, when it starts to make sense, when it gets narrative and voiceover and music and all these different pieces, it's gonna be different than the experience, you know, you normally have, which is, you know, early games are pretty rough. Even Hades was. So I think, you know, you can only do this for a really long time if you're constantly being surprised by the work of your peers and learning from them. And so we're lucky to be able to have both.
Yeah, and you know, I think that it seems like you said, the kind of core team of the folks who had worked on Bastion have been there for a while. And like I said, you know, I've interacted with all of you over time as well too, and seen the work that you're doing. But you know, seeing like Darren work on music and all that, it just is like, yeah, it's pretty. I don't want to say like mind blowing, but it's really fascinating on like how much and how detailed and how far in you can tell that he's like really gone and thought about this stuff. And I think, you know, for me too, like art and music are things that I love, but I'm not particularly talented at. So every time that I see people do them, I'm just like, you know, like how on earth did that happen? You know? And I think that, you know, that growth and that change and, you know, with the audio and with Darren's work is really cool. But then also like how he's explaining that he's working on it. Like there was a quote where he was just like, I want it to sound rad when you fight a Minotaur. I was like, that's a perfect way to go into writing a song, right?
Yeah. No, it's getting on the same page. I mean, so yeah, Darren, you know, it's still shocking when you hear the work for the first time, because you don't know what to expect, and it's very exciting. Him and Greg work really closely on the audio stuff, and in fact, Him and Greg are giving a talk right now. Oh, yeah. So if you've made the mistake of coming to this Hades conversation instead of the one about how they did all the voiceover, don't despair, because like they are, I think you can still rewatch it later. But they're talking about the
back
process.
And forth between the two talks.
Yeah. You can split back and forth. But Greg and Darren collaborate really closely on the audio experience, and Darren, of course, executes so much of it. And Darren also did all the voice direction, and he was the voice of Zagreus in the game. So that
was surreal. That was very strange to watch. I kind of always get a little weirded out when I see people actually doing like voiceovers, like cartoon characters and stuff too. I'm like, that's not what you look like. Yeah,
it's pretty shocking. He's just an enormous talent. So it's been awesome to work with him. And I've known him since I was like 8 years old or something too. So that luck too.
Yeah, which is, I also really love that it was just like, a friendship relationship that kind of blossomed into this professional relationship, as opposed to like somebody, coming in, just someone outside of games and that kind of perspective and stuff as well too, I think is really interesting. But then you have someone like Greg who, is like been very deeply involved in games for a long time. And, I think even though I feel like I'm just like gushing about everyone on your team, I think that what is like this thread to me is this really like very high level of thoughtfulness and like contemplation and like research and the kind of like stewing of ideas and concepts. And I felt like that really came out a lot like through that side of it, like the music, the art, and the narrative component of it, like the three of them talking about their work. Like you can really tell that this is like something that they're really like contemplating on a pretty like interesting level.
Yeah, they are very thoughtful about it. They're very good at discussing it, and they're very good at executing on it. So it's one of those things where there's plenty that goes into it. So I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, but they're just very we have the advantage of working together for so long that like we've developed a lot of shared vocabulary, shared experiences, a shared sense of things. And when we were working on Hades, we were sort of excited to build on all our best ideas from our previous games, which was like a really different mindset than we used before. Because, when we went from Bastion to Transistor, we thought, we need to make something new and original. We want to make something new and original. And so we're going to spend a bunch of time figuring out a new original world, which meant like a lot of the great ideas of Bastion we felt were sort of off limits, like we shouldn't use those. Those are Bastion's thing, and Transistor needs its own thing. And so with Hades, it was a little less like that. We had made 3 games. We were interested in doing something in the roguelike genre, and we wanted to do something more narrative. And so we just, we sort of allowed ourselves the space to use stuff that had worked for us in the past to build on them. And also, that just is enhanced by the chemistry of the fact that it's the same people working on that stuff. So we knew what the problems were with our previous versions of those, or we knew what was new about what we were trying to do. And so in a lot of ways, Hades is like an expression of our strengths as a team, and also our, our strengths as collaborators. This is like the stuff we know we do well actually together, not just individually. This is the stuff that we can really, really do at a level that we can feel satisfied with. Just lucky to work with them.
Yeah. And I think that how you're saying that it's kind of like a progression of all of the different games and you all like working together. Yeah. I think that also to me ties in a bit to, there's a point where you talked about how you all toil on games for a long time. And I want to get into talking a little bit about like the kind of all encompassing nature of doing a project like this. Yeah. But, the timeframes that you're talking about, you're like, okay, we like toil on a game for like 3 or 4 years. Which, is a long amount of time, like I guess just in general, not relative to all of time and space, but it is like a long time, but also in like game development, it's kind of not actually a long time. Yes. And especially I think for smaller teams and indie developers, like projects can go on way longer than you're imagining, just because of constraints and team size and things like that. And I do think that one of the things that is very interesting from other developers and studios standpoint is that you are pretty consistent with like every couple of years, there is like a new game that has come out that is fully fleshed out and thought out, and and there's all these different components and stuff to it. And so I actually kind of wanted to like hear you talk a little bit about that, because I think even though it feels like a long time and maybe it doesn't feel so consistent, I think out of a lot of studios, you actually are fairly consistent and fairly like kind of like quick in a way with this process.
Yeah. I feel like so we're consistent, I think consistent in terms of like how our output, for two reasons. One is dispositionally, as people who work together, we like want to work on stuff, scope it down and finish it. That is like sort of like the simple way of saying it. Like we share this disposition. We are always refining the thing we're doing. And the reason we do that in a way that works across the board is we have this like value around basically embracing constraints. So like as a small team, you have a ton of constraints, right? Even big teams have constraints. Yeah. And so for us though, it's really wonderful to like work within them. Like what are the things we can do? What are the things we can do well? How like when do we want to do it? And stuff like PAX, for example, in the past, where we used to bring a demo to PAX and then go back into the lab and then release a game, and that was the only times you'd ever see it, until we tried early access on Hades. The constraint of a deadline for PAX was actually useful because, going back to the failure talk that I referenced at the top of this, we cut gardening from Bastion 4 days before driving up to Seattle from San Francisco, because we thought this doesn't make any sense and it doesn't work. And the constraint of that was a hard decision, and we had been working on that part of it for over a year. But the upside is like almost the relief of like not having to think about it anymore. It's out. So we are very like constraint driven as a team. We're always mindful of that, and that comes down to everything we do. Even when we're trying a new idea, we want to see some ideas show promise, like as quickly, which really does work for some things. Like it really works for certain design ideas or certain system ideas. It maybe works less well for like really big problems, like technical problems that might take months and months and months to solve. And so those are examples of the types of things. Like our mindset is usually around like, what are the constraints? We want to know the constraints. We want to know the constraints. We want to know what the problems are. We want to solve them. And so, we really value them. Like constraints are wonderful. We always want to know what the constraints are. And that's part of being realistic with ourselves and with each other. It's the only way we can make sensible decisions.
And I have heard that deadline kind of like having an external deadline or an external thing, like you can't push PAX back and you can't stop people from coming and playing the game, so you kind of just like have to get it done. I think has been helpful for a lot of teams. But now this is also kind of like leading me into another question that I had. And I'm kind of wondering is part of the decision to move forward with doing a game in early access is to just basically have another set of like constraints in a way? I hadn't really thought about it until you had said it this way, but is that like partially one of the factors?
Yes, it's partially one of the factors. So Hades was an early access game before it was a Greek mythology roguelike. Coming off of Pyre, having worked on 3 games in the model of we work on it in secret, we like announce it, and then we release it. And, maybe a couple hundred people will play it at PAX, and maybe some of our friends will play it along the way. Having done that so many times, we were just really interested in doing a process that was more open, more transparent, and got us to a game faster. And the last time we'd actually done something like that was Bastion, because Bastion went to PAX, I think, like a year after it started or something like that. It was something like that. It started in 2009. It went to PAX in 2010. It released a year later. So it was one of those things where we were interested in doing that, but we were also interested in the changes we would have to make to do that, if that makes any sense. So like we would have to learn, for example, how to keep a game stable over a longer period of time. We would have to learn how to take community feedback and integrate it into our process. and we would have to learn what happens when those are the constraints, and not just kind of like, the deadline of PAX, or when we hope the game would be done, or any of those types of things. So we're really interested in seeing what we would learn from such a process, and we were lucky that there were so many examples, like so many amazing examples of games that had been created in early access that were huge inspirations to us. Like much of the Clay catalog fits into that. Darkest Dungeon, Subnautica, Larian's games. There's just so many amazing early access successes, and of course Dead Cells by Motion Twin, which was a roguelike that they had done in early access. Just seeing how it could be done well was like inspiring as a game developer, and so we wanted to see if we could do that as well. And so the Hades was born. The idea for Hades came out of a desire to try something in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about some of the other examples of games that have gone through early access, because I think I was talking about this yesterday. I was like, no games go through early access, and you're like, the thing is, like, a lot of games actually go through early access, just nobody kind of remembers that was
they were early access games.
Yeah, but I remember when early access first came out, and it was kind of like met with some trepidation, I feel like, because people were just like, ooh, I don't know. But even with going to events and things like that, games are kind of one of the few mediums where fans get to interact with it a lot of times while it's in progress, nobody's kind of watching an undone version of a Marvel movie or something, and then giving community feedback on it. I mean, I guess aside from a trailer or something, but I think it's interesting how you're talking about using it as a learning experience and ways for the studio to gain new skills. And I think you had mentioned too about kind of practicing some parts of it.
we actually rehearsed it. So before our initial launch in 2018, we shipped 3 1-month updates to ourselves, basically. So we didn't do the marketing art necessarily and stuff, but we tried to do a lot of the parts. Let's what would we call this thing? This update, this last thing, what does it look? What does the contour of a 4-week cycle look like compared to a 3-year cycle, which is what we're used to before? And rehearsing it was awesome because it gave us the sense that we were ready for the real thing.
It's a very smart idea.
Yeah, and then the real thing happens, and then an example of a change we made really early on in our early access is we went from 4-week updates, update every 4 weeks, to an update closer to it was more like 8 to 10. And we tried different things. We tried 4, then we tried 8, then we did 5 again, and then we went back to 8 to 10. Yeah. And one of the things you can learn in your early access is how to do your early access. We learned a lot from those first 2 or 3 1-month updates that got us realizing hey, what the game needs now is longer updates with more time. Our development director and the co-founder of Supergiant, Gavin Simon, actually architected the rhythm that we worked under, and it was we stuck to it. You talk about constraints. We did features for 2.5 weeks, 2.5 to 3 weeks if you include the time to plan the update. Then, if a feature wasn't done, it did not graduate. If there was still work left on it to even stand it up, then we couldn't move it forward. Then we did content for several weeks. And then the last couple of weeks were polish. And in the polish phase, a small group of people inside the community got to play it, and then it would go out. And we also had internal QA resources and stuff, so that were vetting the update as we were making it, and we would play it. So it was one of those things where it gave a rhythm to the whole process that we got quite comfortable with over time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there was a part in the documentary where Greg was talking about kind of the thought and the rationale behind the way that you also approach doing early access. So kind of having multiple early accessees, I guess, and then leading into the Steam launch, which is where there's like a larger part of your fan base and things like that. And I think I've mentioned to you this a few times before, but I feel like talking with you and hearing about how Supergiant runs is like when you talk to someone who's just in a really good functioning marriage and you're just like, oh yeah, of course that's how you would do that. Of course you should practice like a little bit of early access before you like go and do early access. Like totally, why didn't I think of that? And honestly did not think of it. I think it's kind of a testament to the way that you all think about it and work together to really be like kind of very like practical, but innovative at the same time around like how you're approaching a change or a shift or something new with the studio.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's the two things to say there is just, we didn't invent that process, right? So we could see so many people do it so well.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing, and we saw, really specific things we saw other people do. Like, for example, the countdown clock to the next update that was inside the main menu is something that Clay had been doing for a long time. The marking inside your patch notes which pieces of it were inspired by community feedback, something we saw Dead Cells do. And, it's one of those things where you see these specific practices and you go, I see what that does. It shows honestly and truthfully, which changes kind of came from people's experience with the game that you as developers were not always having, because especially with a roguelike game, you can't experience all of it. And as a developer, it's really hard to experience your game like a player might. And so all of these things kind of came together to make that like a functional process for us. We didn't have to make it up. Yeah. But I mean, I think the other thing about it is that if you have like a learning orientation, then you can, as a group, know that part of what you're doing it for is not for it to be perfect, but for you to learn something from the process of doing it. And then the output can be the learning, even if it doesn't always go well, even if every update isn't always like a slam dunk or whatever.
Yeah.
And we can do that because we have the privilege and good fortune of self-funding our titles, of owning our own IP and all this kind of stuff. So, like a question you did not ask is like, why doesn't everyone just practice? It's because everyone has different constraints than the ones we have, right? And so we're really lucky that our first game enabled us to essentially choose our own destiny in a lot of these ways, and to basically have the flexibility to make these types of decisions that work well for our team.
Yeah. And I think that that's really interesting to point out too, as well too, like going into these projects with like a curiosity and like beginner's mindset, because then you're kind of less attached to it. Like, okay, it has to definitely look like this, or it has to come out on this day, or it has to be this thing. And so it can be rewarding even when it's not exactly the way that you're imagining it would be. And another thing I'd like to kind of highlight in there as well too, is I think that this is not totally unique to the indie community, but I do love this about it, that it's very kind of collaborative across studios and across like leaders and developers and people, and even something like GDC, to come and share like the insights that you learn. Cause it's this kind of like, it's not so much a competition as it is like the rising tide floats all boats kind of situation. And, there's always people kind of paving the way and trying new things. And then when they're willing to share like what worked for them and what didn't work, I think it can benefit everybody. Cause like you said, a lot of these things were not like the first time that they had ever been done, but they have been done the first time by someone.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, we the people I mentioned, the studios I mentioned, we talked to all those people. like we didn't just get inspired by them. We went to the primary source for a lot of that, because another thing that we're fortunate to be able to do. But it's one of those things where I guess for whatever reason, I feel like a lot of development on small teams is like people racing against their own best time. You're not really like trying to like destroy the other one or whatever. Yeah. So it's really like sort of fortunate that you can have those types of conversations and ask, like how might I do this? Am I thinking about this right? Are we thinking about this right? We have the good fortune to be able to do that.
yeah. And then, the amazing outcome, or hopefully, the outcome of those kinds of conversations and that kind of work is that like the games are all cooler, right?
Yeah.
So like in the end, hopefully like, the fans are getting the best of this. Is like everybody's mind sharing on like, how do we make like this experience in these games just like the coolest things that they can be possible, so people enjoy them and play them and have fun,
Yeah. And, especially when it comes to something like a process, right? Like production process at the scale of smaller teams is like pretty different, right? Than it is for like a much bigger team. And so a lot of what's interesting to talk about is like, what's your process? Because I think sort of what you're actually asking is like, how do your people work together in a functional way? Like, what is the way in which your group does this? Like, how are you thinking about this? And so, we're always thinking about that too. How do we work together better? How do we make it work for each part of the process that we're in?
Yeah. And I think there's kind of like two sort of like branches of this part of the conversation that I'm interested in. One we talked a little bit about before is the kind of like, I think the documentary did a good job of putting this forward, is like how all encompassing working on a project like this is, especially as a small team. Like, I mean, can you even imagine the number of times you said the word Hades in the last like 4 years? Or like how many times you've seen that logo, or how many times you talked about something about Hades or thought about Hades. And like, it was one of the things when I was watching that I was kind of missing a bit about working on my own projects, is like, oh yeah, there's this thing where at some point, it's not like it takes over your entire existence. Some people have that. It seems like you all have a good like work-life balance, but it is this thing where it's just like, it kind of gets into like your DNA or something at some point, and I think that was like a really interesting thing that came across in the documentary, just like the kind of, the all-encompassing nature of game development and making a project like this.
Yeah, well, I think this is the part with an early access game, as a game developer, can be especially, I'll use the word compelling, because, how often do you get people to play something of yours and give you like a response to the experience to produce so fast? There's nothing like that, where, someone is having a problem, you read about it, you fix it. The way we conduct our early access through our Discord, we had a feedback channel, an idea we got from the Rocket League Discord. And we read every piece of feedback that came through, and some of those feedback got coalesced and became a task on the team. And someone would do something about it, and then you'd push it out. And sometimes you could tell it would work because someone in the community might say, God, that's so much better. Or sometimes you could tell it could work because they stopped talking about it as much. Yeah. Like, this is just not coming up as much anymore. And so maybe that problem is actually like gone now, and we don't have to think about it for a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like a very compelling process, and it does get into every part of you. But the truth is, like, these games we make, they're kind of with us forever. We're still, Jen was just doing Bastion anniversary art, that we posted yesterday and stuff like that, still thinking about Rux and the Kid and Zulf and Zia and all that stuff. So we're like still, they're a part of you. And I think as people dispositionally, we do get just really creatively compelled by the projects we pick, and we know in some way, they're going to be with us, like kind of no matter what they're like or how they turn out or any of those types of things. They're just always going to be with us. It'd be impossible not to think and talk about them.
Yeah. And then, the other kind of side of that earlier thread was a bit about, the process of like, how do you do this process, or how does this happen? And I think I texted you about this when I was watching. It's like, I think my favorite piece of television that's ever been produced is the conversation where you're having like between a bunch of folks on the team about like whether he should like float while he has a gun or not.
Oh yeah. The real conversation.
I live for that kind of stuff, like there is a lot of like, there's like this exciting, like, ooh, like look at the art and look at this, but like a lot of projects are a lot of like, let's talk about this thing.
Yeah.
And very big, very detail oriented, and it just kind of goes on, and there's not like an exciting resolution in the meeting, like sometimes these things just like, they're just long meetings and conversations that go on for a while.
Yeah. It's a reference to a conversation about, we have this weapon in the game that is essentially like, it's a gun. It's called the Adamant Rail. And we knew we wanted to make it. There was just a discussion over like, well, how should it work? And one of the constraints actually is the way we kind of do our characters. It would have been pretty hard for the character to move and fire.
Yeah.
But every gun in every video game allows the character to move and fire, basically. So how to get around such a constraint? And so my brilliant idea was, maybe the character could float and it would be fine, and that wasn't fine. We didn't do that. Instead, he plants his feet in place. It looks sensible. It feels good. I'm happy to where we got with that. But it's a good example of, when you think about like functional collaborative teams, sometimes I think about like, well, how much do you have to talk? Because when you have a conversation, now we're going to be using our words, and luckily we all practice communication well, and we practice trying to improve it and get good at it. But like a way easier way to do that is to demonstrate the work. And so, if someone can make a thing and show it to you, the conversation can be more focused around the thing that was made, and is it getting us closer to our goals, or is it pushing us further from our goals? And so, as a team, we've become very like sort of cognizant about conversations that are going long. It's like what's missing here? Like what is actually something that someone needs to kind of take back into their own mental space, or work on something and bring it back to the group? Is it really something we can talk ourselves out of or around? And I think that's like an example of, a sensitivity to something that we've developed over time. I'll tell you, someone who's very good at this is actually our creative director, Greg. You and I have actually talked about this before, but Hades used to be about a different character. It used to be about...
I was going to bring that up.
It's the story of Theseus going into the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur. That was originally the game we were going to make. And when it came time to draw the main character, there was aspects of it that weren't really coming together. And we're talking about it. And Jen and Greg were talking about it. And Greg felt like there was just something missing. And so he came back from his Christmas break and he had this idea, which is like, what if, you play as the son of Hades? You play as Zagreus, this character, it's a little known character from Greek mythology, and you're trying to get out of hell. And every time you try to, you fail, your dad pulls you back into your house. And I think that's an example of an idea that like 6 or 7 years earlier might have taken us like a month or 2 or 3 to get used to. But like in a week, a lot of the characters Greg had described in that idea were like kind of in the game in some form. And him and Jen were kind of off to the races on a revision. And so much of what we had made to that point, because Greg, of course, was internalizing the constraint of how do we keep the Greek myth stuff that's working? Like, how do we keep aspects of the gameplay and stuff that's working? How do we keep aspects of this? Like, we had this Olympian boon system where the Olympians would empower you, and that was working too. Yeah. So, like, what is the idea that keeps that, but gets us around this issue we're having with drawing the main character? And frankly, it didn't even appear as an issue at first. It did to Greg and Jen when they were working on it, but it didn't appear like wasn't like a stop the presses, everyone, let's get into a room and figure this out and talk it out. And so the dominoes fell really fast when Greg came back with that, and one after the other, people contributed their piece to this new idea, and came together really fast. And it was we've had sort of main character changes and big changes like that on other games. They take a really long time. This time it didn't. So I don't know, just went way faster.
Way faster. And I mean, I was going to ask too, like, okay, well, how long did that kind of decision take to propagate through? Because it seems like it would be a big thing, but I think that you're right about there's this kind of nonverbal like kind of component to things like that when it was like slightly off somehow in a way that wasn't really conscious with the team. And then when the solution was presented, it was just kind of like, oh yes, like this is the right
Yeah, it's like your mind opens up. It's like, you see the humor in the idea he's talking about and the characters he's contemplating. You see exactly how the stuff we've made mostly fits with it. At that point, and how it actually gets us closer to the stated goals we had for the project in a lot of ways. And so, he tried the work, he put it in game. It's part of the reason, Darren voiced Zagreus, and we thought it was Scratch. Like, we thought it was all Scratch view for like months and months and months and months. Yeah, because we have Logan Cunningham, who's our principal voice actor, who was the voice of the narrator in Bastion and the Archjustice in Pyre and the voice in Transistor. And so Logan is playing all these parts in the game, plays 6 or 7 parts or something, and he's and we're like, well, Logan, of course, all of these are going to stay, but this Darren one, who knows? And then, but it's like freaking worked. So after a while, it felt like it was the right thing. So it was. I mean,
even you talking about it now, I'm like, my mind goes from the like, oh, it'd be cool to go fight a Minotaur to like, oh yeah, like with the context of having Hades already out. So all my original ideas, but like it does kind of like open up a like, ooh, like that's a really cool, like there's this and then there's this,
No, and the key thing there is it turned it added a more of a family story to the game, and the family story is, I think, one of the Olympians are one big dysfunctional family in the way that Greg has been thinking about them, and Zagreus and his dad and his principal goal of trying to find his mother, and so all of these types of things, you as creators, you bring your own experience to it, but you also see like, wow, the possibilities of this are really interesting, and what would happen if we did it? Then you want to know.
And I mean, I think this is a good example of another question that I had actually heard gotten from another developer around, was there any kind of decision that you guys made design wise, business, whatever, that didn't like seem totally intuitive at the time, that now you look back at it and you're like, that was clutch. I mean, I imagine that was a big answer to that, oh, we changed the entire main character and story of the game.
We did that. That was pretty,
that's a good one.
That worked out pretty well. It's tough to say. There's 2 or 3 things, I guess. There's at least a few things that we tried that I can say with certainty we didn't know if they would work. Some of them were technical, like we converted our whole engine from C# to a native C engine so that we could, be on the Switch at 1.0 and when we came out of early access in September 17th. So there's probably 2 other things that come to mind. So this isn't an unexpected design decision, but it's like one of the most potent design mechanics in the game is actually inspired a lot by mechanics in other games, like if you remember in World of Warcraft, they introduced the rest system, which was like shocking at the time, which is like, instead of penalizing you over and over for dying, they were like, what if you had to like sort of, if you like accumulated rest and you logged off, you would get this experience bonus. They turned, mechanics that were often kind of really punitive into some sort of positive sort of formatting. And so there was, we have examples or versions of mechanics like that in the game. So we have this dark thirst mechanic, which incentivizes you to try and follow the bonus the weapon is applied to. And, we see that that's pretty effective at getting people to try different stuff, even though they could just use the same thing over and over and over again. There's other things like that come to mind. But
well, I was going to say my other kind of like tangential question to this, because there's a little bit of this in the No Clip documentary about it, like a kind of just really sort of like funny bug that made it into like, got patched eventually. But it kind of got me thinking, there's like whole blogs dedicated to like The Sims just going off the, like somebody's like through the roof or whatever. Like, was there like a bug or just something that happened when you guys were doing it where it's just like, obviously you can't keep it in, but just like the best bug?
You know what? There was there was like I don't know if there was a best bug, but one of my favorite bugs was the, I like to think about it as like, I don't know, it's something about it just like is very heartwarming to me. We had a bug.
Okay.
Someone realized when you throw the shield, and you put the Ares boon on it, which is supposed to give it a curse, it doesn't work. Yeah. So we're reading Discord and we're like, geez, that's weird. Did we miss that? So we go put the Ares curse on the shield, and sure enough, it doesn't work. And so we're like, all right, you know what? Let's fix that. We'll push it into tonight's patch. Fix it, push it into tonight's patch. And then a bunch of people are killing themselves in the game. And we're like, well, you can't really kill yourself. There's no way to do that.
Yeah.
And we realized that because the shield comes back to you after you throw it, that when you threw the curse out, it would stay attached to the shield to come back to you and then apply the curse to you. And then if you had low enough health, you would just die.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I like to think of it as heartwarming because it's like everyone doing the right thing. It's like, a person found a bug, they reported it. On our site, someone fixed it.
Yeah.
And we were like, this looks pretty good. We put it in. And then it's like, oh, everyone's dying now. And then we fixed that, it was like, it was hot fixed.
Yeah.
And we improved our process and stuff. Stuff like that didn't happen as often. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that where it's just, where it's a little bit, it's one of those things where it's just really, the surprises are really fun. There were probably lots of things like that I just don't remember during our early access.
I mean, that's the thing that's kind of interesting with games when you're troubleshooting, like from before I was in the games industry, I just kind of assumed that like whoever created the game had this like godlike ability to just make the game do whatever, which you kind of do. But really what you're doing is you're like creating a bunch of systems that you sort of have control over, but like act in very strange ways. Like there's a part in the documentary where you guys are putting the trailer together and you're like, the way a lot of those like videos and screen captures and stuff is like somebody plays it until a thing happens that's really cool and you record it. And they're like, oh, can we add the blood effect or something? And I just like kind of dawned on me that it's like, you can't just like make the game do the thing that you want to do to like record it, which is like a very strange thing to do where you're making something that you kind of don't really fully understand, and then how you test that and how it all interacts with each other, which I think is why The Sims has, bugs that just go off the rails because there's so many systems that are interacting with each other. But Hades had a lot of that, right? Like there's an insane amount of
interacting, branches, and overlapping systems. That's also power of early access to help us understand it in a really good QA team. But yeah, I mean, there's so many permutations. And so many things that can happen in a game. For us, I think the hard part actually at first was to embrace the idea that we were now making, because we had made these sort of, Pyre was our first time where we made a game where there were so many choices that we knew that we weren't going to experience them all.
Yeah.
And as developers, and but it still went somewhere that was semi-controlled until the end when there's all these different permutations and, the game puts together a ballad that reacts to all the decisions you made in the game. In Hades, examples of things we had to become comfortable with as a team who worked the other way was we weren't gonna know. We weren't even gonna have a chance to know, actually, how the whole thing might feel or come together. In any given update cycle. And even, it's quite interesting. People are like, when you were playing Hades, when did you know it would be what it became? And it's like, what's very surprising is that we didn't know that. Like Hades was in early access for a long time. So we thought we kind of understood the kind of game it was. And we started doing our final playthroughs the summer before it came out with the ending that we had always anticipated. And we knew we were going to have a game that had an ending. Even if you could, we had, it sort of has multiple phases of that, but it's something that we knew we were going to put in the game, the narrative resolution.
Yeah.
And even then it's like, it's just one of those things where we experience stuff, we push it around, we try to feel out what works, but it's still hard to play your own game like a player.
Yeah.
It's like one of the play acting things that I find really, really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And it's actually part of the thing with capture too. Capture is different than even that. Capture is performative play. It's like, how do you play so that it like one of the worst things, Greg Sabin, our creative director, and James, one of our people who does QA, like they did a lot of the actual like stuff that gets captured is like, if they have to try to recapture something mostly as is, but just a little bit different, like, yes, they can load the save and try and do it, but a lot of weird stuff happens when you're when you're going through such a process. So yeah, anyway, I mean,
I guess it's
deeply dissatisfying answer of, I don't know. And yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's kind of, it's interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of other art that is like this, where, to go back to the earlier thing of like, how much it kind of sinks in while you're working on a project like this, but it stays with you forever. But it is also something that you kind of don't have control of, especially after it goes out into the world. And now in a lot of ways, it is like the players' idea of it and the perception of it and the changes that were made because of those decisions and things like that. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't want to liken it so much to like having a child, because I don't actually have that full experience, but it kind of feels a little bit like it's like you kind of have this thing that you're building and creating and, have some control over, and it kind of grows. And at some point it is kind of no longer yours, but always with you, in a way. And it's kind of like, I think launching a game and that creative process to me is like one of the most kind of like vulnerable and intense and kind of like strange experiences that I think a creative person can go through. And I've seen it with so many developers, like putting something out like that out in the world, I think is actually pretty like, I don't know, like courageous or something in a way. Like it's pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, we have each other, so we're not doing it alone. But and we have our fans and the people who were there for us from the start, who really sort of bolster us and believe in us, and so we have those things, and so you obviously want to continue to earn their trust. So you need to stay vigilant. But yeah, I mean, the thing you said is very similar to something I've thought about a lot, and sometimes we talk about on the team, is like the part of the game that was ours was always just the part we hadn't released. Because I really love this phrase that I hear Gavin use a lot. It came out of one of his learnings on Hades, which is like when, we talk about the feature week. Mm-hmm. We say the feature is done after 2 weeks, but it's not. The phrase he really likes to use is that it's like ready to begin. It's like ready to start, because now it needs content. Now it needs iteration. Now it needs QA. Now it needs audio. Now, then, when an update is done, it's actually ready to begin again with the players in early access and their feedback and our patching process on that, and then wrapping that and then bringing that into the next update all the way until it's done. So that's why I think also for developers, the experience of finishing a game can be profoundly sad, because everything you're talking, the upside of everything you're talking about, of the creative, how compelling it is to work on something, how much it seeps into your mind and your life, the sense of the rhythm and how many things are ready to begin, and then you're actually at a point now we're out of ready to begin. We're like ready to be done. And that's like a different way of doing it. And then like you said, it's more than yours. It's something like Hades, which I'm very proud of. And I'm very proud of the team that made it. It gets this reaction partly because of what players bring to it. And the experience is a collaboration between us and them in some way. And so, I mean, I feel very fortunate. The whole team feels very fortunate to have been able to do this work, to finish it, to have made something that so many people have connected with. But they brought their experiences to it. Yeah. So like they brought themselves to the game. They brought their imaginations to fill in the parts of it that we as a small team can't always create, right? There's not giant lavish cutscenes to describe every interaction, right? Yeah. So the things they brought to it, I feel like very honored that we could be part of that process for them. Yeah. So that part feels quite good for, I think, everyone on the team.
Yeah, that's a really like kind of like wonderful way to think about it. Actually, while you're talking about that, it kind of reminds me of my art teacher in high school had said that like basically a painting is never done. You just decide to stop working on it. Yeah. It's like you and there are, and I've seen it in a lot of creative fields where people just will perpetually work on something, and never like quote unquote finish it. And I think, there's so much and you can go so far down into the process that it, like kind of being done with something is just like deciding like, I am done, Yeah. And one of the other questions actually I had for you was like, do you feel like Hades is like done, Yeah.
So, part of the way I've I've been asked that question. I find it really hard to answer. How do you know when you're done?
Yeah.
And I'll answer your question in a moment, but we often try to think about like completeness. Completeness to us is different than perfection. Completeness is like all the parts have a reason to be there and nothing is extraneous.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just going to have Amir kind of summarize. I'd asked him if it felt like the game was like done. And what they're working on now with it. So
yeah, we have the Xbox and PlayStation launches coming up on August 13th, as I mentioned, and so we're, it's still an active part of our lives. We just released a patch that added Japanese and all this kind of stuff. So while we were working on Hades, we patched Pyre. We just the games are just a part of our studio, right? And so they're it's always these little things for sure.
Yeah. I think another one of my favorite parts of the No Clip documentary is like one of the very last things that Danny asked you is like, what are you working on next? And you're like, we're doing a patch. Just like literally what you've been doing for like the whole like 3-year documentary or however long it was like, we're making a patch.
Danny, we're making a patch. So Danny did a great job on the No Clip series. We're really like lucky to be working with him. But I think the thing that working on it showed is just like Danny's amazing. It's just like he was just a part of the making of that game, as far as I think a lot of us are concerned, because he added something which we might not have done ourselves, which is like an opportunity to reflect on it while it was happening. And so it's a wonderful gift. And so we're really grateful to him for that. And he knows as well as anyone. It's like, wow, that stuff just sometimes it just feels like it might not stop.
And I think that that's really poignant to kind of say about the chance to have reflection, especially even while you're working on it, or even now to be able to look back at it. I remember, I think it was Michelle Obama or something was talking about her book, and she was like, we had this really interesting opportunity that a lot of people don't have, is that I basically had the time and the space to sit down and write this book and reflect on like what happened to us over the last 8 years. A lot of times you're just kind of going, and you don't really get to like kind of understand the progress that you're making, or, the kind of the true length of the journey, because you're not documenting it in that way, or you're not getting the time to reflect on it. So I actually think it's like incredibly cool that you guys are always going to have this like thing that you can look at and see like the reactions of like, what was it going to feel like when we launched it? And what was it going to, like watching to see what you're nominated for? Like you get to like have that, recorded for yourself, which is amazing.
It's an amazing gift, if you have a learning orientation, as we do as a studio, it's really useful because you can keep kind of taking your experience and pushing it forward and all that kind of stuff. But you quite easily forget, I think, even if you don't have that, if you do or don't have that, like what the experience of doing the thing was actually like at the time you did it.
Yeah.
And now inescapably, we will always know.
You will always have that. You will always have that image of you watching yourself on Nintendo Direct.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I can see that
in your hoodie.
Yes. I can reprise that scene anytime. But that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the last few minutes here, which I'm kind of a little bummed about because I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff forever. But I did have one last question. Is there any game or piece of music or book or like thing or something that you're just like really into right now or thinking a lot about, or anything that you kind of just want to like talk about or plug? Yes,
I want to talk about, so there's a lot of inspiring and amazing work being done by a lot of developers out there. I have personally been really inspired lately by the work of Youth Cat Studios, who made Dyson Sphere Program, which is an early access game.
Nice.
That game does like everything that a sensible independent developer would tell another independent developer not to do, right? It's like massive scope. It's a game with a whole universe inside of it. And like all the universes inside of it. And it's an amazing, compelling game that has so many moments that open your mind a little bit more to what the game is and what it could be and how expansive it could be. And it does it in a very smart way. I love it. And I found out the game is made by a small number of people.
Interesting.
It's a really small team. And I had the joy of tracking down their email and sending them a note, and they sent something back, which was nice too.
I'm sure they were very excited about that.
Well, I was just excited. Yeah, I was just excited to tell them their game is so good. You know, when people make something like that gives you like energy, like creative energy to do stuff, because you sit there and go, how did they do this? Like, how did they do this? It's such a small team. How did they do this? I just get a lot out of that. So they've given me a tremendous gift.
I love when game developers geek out on other developers' games. Oh, yeah. Like, it's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, no, the other game that did that for me in the last couple of years was Stardew Valley, for sure. So there's there's people on the team, they can rattle off a list of them. These are just mine, for sure. I feel quite lucky.
I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of us.
No, it's okay. We don't.
Stardew Valley. So anyways, so we're gonna wrap up there, and just as a kind of parting thing, Amir, if there's anything like, you know, where can people find Hades and like follow you and all that stuff? Yeah,
Hades is out on PC and the Nintendo Switch, and then on August 13th it will be out on Xbox and PlayStation of this year. And thank you so much to all our players, and thank you to the Game Developers Conference for nominating us for 6 awards in tonight's show. We're really excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah. And thank you so much, Amir, for taking the time to do this and for asking me to have this conversation with you. I'm really excited about it. So I thought we made this happen.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.